Hello. So, as you probably have guessed from the title of this movie, I was wrong. The next movie in the lineup is not Jungle Book or Aristocats, although Jungle Book is next after this one. It is The Sword and the Stone. But the closest thing to Excalibur that I have, because the other one that I have over there is a bit too small, I'd say. So, we have this, my Excalibur for the day. Um, So, Sword in the Stone came out in 1963. It is very much based off of the Arthurian legend, although it very much diverts at various points in time throughout the whole movie, considering it's mostly just about, kid Arthur just before he becomes, just before he pulls the sword from the stone. The sword will not be in my hands the entire video, but for the moment it's fun to play with. The dog is here at the moment, as you can tell, and he wants me to move the shade so we can look out the window. I moved the shade. I don't think it was to his satisfaction since he's still staring at me. We'll see how long he stays around. So, the premise of The Sword in the Stone, as I said, is based off of the Arthurian legends. I do not have any Disney Sword in the Stone books. The dog is moving. Let's see what happens. You have to come this way. Or jump off the bed. One moment. Okay, the dog's out. So, as I said, based off of the Arthurian legend, I don't have any Sword in the Stone books, but I do have a couple of Arthur legend books. I have this one that's just like a graphic novel, Arthur Excalibur, the legend of King Arthur. I have this young Arthur, and I have just another, the story of King Arthur and his knights. Rowlet is here because there is an owl in the Sword in the Stone whose name is Archimedes. It can talk. Well, the owl can talk. It's a he. The movie begins with in England after the death of the king Uther Pendragon. He has no heir to his name, and so England is threatened to be torn apart by war. Miraculously, the mythical Sword in the Stone appears in London with an inscription proclaiming that whosoever pulls it out is the rightful King of England. Many try to remove the sword, but none succeeded, and the sword is soon forgotten, leaving England in the Dark Ages. So it's basically, king dies, there's no rightful heir to the throne, weird sword shows up because voice from the heavens proclaims, whoever can pull this sword out of the stone is the guy that's your king. Yes, because that always is the way that you should choose your ruler, because who can pull a rock? Who can pull the sword out of a rock? Okay, is there like another one where it's like, whoever can pull that battle axe out of the tree is the new king? Okay, I'm your king. What if a girl pulled it out? What would they have done then? Oh, I am well aware that there are stories out there, fan fictions or whatever, where like Arthur is female. I know they've done that in a few things for, like what is it, Avalon High or whatever. I think I don't remember if that's Disney or not, but I know there's stuff they did like Avalon High, where it's like, modern day King Arthur and like everybody's reincarnated, but Arthur was a female, and all the legends don't state that. So we find out that there is a wizard named Merlin. Of course, there's a wizard named Merlin. This shirt actually is why Merlin is why I'm wearing this shirt. Can't see it too well on the camera, but it says, and I'll put the picture here. It says, "My mind is like my internet browser. I have 19 tabs open. 3 are frozen, and I have no idea where the music is coming from." Because Merlin is not quite, he's still kind of the wise old man, but he's more the, think absent-minded professor is a very good way of putting Merlin in this setup. He's very scatterbrained and everything. He has his owl, Archimedes, that can talk. He trained it to talk. And he is expecting the arrival of a 12-year-old boy. Doesn't know exactly why, but he is. and he knows that he's supposed to lead the boy down a path of knowledge so he can do great things, because Merlin is very much of the mind of, brain will always outwit brawn. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad concept, but sometimes having a bit of brawn on your side can be quite helpful. So we have him, and our community's waiting. We are introduced to Arthur, who is this scrawny little kid up here, and his kind of foster brother-ish, Sir Kay. They're out hunting. Arthur causes, Kay to miss his shot, so Arthur has to go and find the arrow, ends up falling into Merlin's house, where Merlin basically says, well, I'm going to teach you, tells him about different things about the future, like steam locomotives and like all this other stuff, and it's just like, oh, now I'm going to come with you, and I'm going to come with you to your castle where you live with your kind of foster father and your foster brother, and I'm going to teach you, everything that you need to know. And Arthur is just kind of befuddled by this. Throughout the course of the thing, Archimedes is more the voice of reason. Yeah, the owl is the voice of reason. The sword's fun to play with. I'll put it down eventually, but I'm not ready to put the sword down yet. I want to play with it more. It's just hollow plastic. I kind of wish I had a more, sharp sword. I don't know. Few other swords. I need a real sword. I don't have any real swords anymore. I have a real dagger. It's downstairs. It might get used at some point, but I don't have a real sword. We kept giving them to my brother-in-law, and he actually has one that looks a lot like Excalibur. But so we get Merlin using his magic to kind of demonstrate his magic. He packs up everything in his house inside of his little suitcase, which is, I'm assuming is some of a Mary Poppins reference, but I don't remember if Mary Poppins happens before or after Sword in the Stone. I think it happens after Sword in the Stone. But packs everything into his little tiny, packs everything into his bag, and then him and Arthur make their way to, well, Arthur is called Wart. W-A-R-T, Wart. And that's what he's referred to as by pretty much everybody. His foster father, his foster brother. Merlin even keeps calling him Wart. Same thing. I think Archimedes keeps calling him Wart. Go back to the castle, and we're introduced to Sir Ector, who is Arthur's foster father. Found Arthur as a baby and raised him. Not quite as much affection as he gave his own son, but he still seems to care about him, although he is a bit firmer, I would say a bit firmer on Arthur when it comes to punishing him. Kay doesn't seem to get in trouble that much. So Merlin basically convinces Ector that, I'm gonna stay in your castle, and I'm gonna teach Arthur how to do things, which basically results in Merlin summoning a blizzard inside the palace. Palace, it's like a rundown castle. Summons a blizzard inside the castle, and Ector says, okay, you can stay. They put him in this really rickety tall tower that's like leaks all over the place, so it's just like, it's kind of hard to scare him off. Arthur kind of more dreams about becoming a squire, because he doesn't think he has what's physically required to become a knight. So he's like, well, I'll be Kay's squire, and that's kind of Arthur's goal at the beginning of the movie. And Arthur gets about 3 different lessons that we see from Merlin. The first one is Merlin is trying to teach Arthur about different ways of imagining the world, and he turns both Arthur and himself into fish, and they go swimming in like the castle moat, and it's like swimming, and there's not a whole lot of most of the thing that results in the musical numbers in this is just Merlin singing. Like, he sings when he's packing up all of his stuff, and then he sings again when he turns him and Arthur into a fish when they're swimming through the moat, and then they end up interacting with this giant, I don't remember what it's called. I think it's a giant pike. I remember it's a giant fish thing that lives in the lake, and he ends up, Arthur ends up outsmarting it a few different times, and then Archimedes saves him, and then him and Merlin are fine. And then we get this other bit where Arthur is supposed to be cleaning everything in the kitchen, all the different pots and pans and everything. And Archimedes or Merlin comes along and he's like, I'll just, magic everything so it'll clean itself. So we get, all the dishes are, magically cleaning themselves and such and, putting themselves away, which unfortunately results in Arthur getting in trouble later. But first we have a very good sequence where we have Arthur and Merlin Merlin turns him and Arthur into squirrels. So we have him and Arthur running around as squirrels, and unfortunately, they end up coming across this little girl squirrel, who unfortunately ends up taking a liking to Arthur. And she's very much infatuated with Arthur. And Merlin is like, well, you're the boy squirrel, she's the girl squirrel. She very, she likes you. And she, just starts chasing Arthur all over the place. At one point, she saves him from a wolf and everything. And there's this other older female squirrel that comes along and kind of gets infatuated with Merlin. Unfortunately, we get two different reactions when they turn back into human. When Merlin turns back into a human, it's, makes the female squirrel that had liked him scream and run off. When Arthur gets turned back into a human, it makes the girl squirrel that really liked him very, very sad. And Merlin makes this comment of, let me find the comment, I have it here. So we get this moment where after Arthur gets turned back into a human, the little girl squirrel sees this and then she runs off because she's sad by this. And she ends up watching Merlin and Arthur leave, and it's, she just saw this, this boy squirrel that she really liked get turned into a human. Find out that he's really a human, and it kind of breaks her heart. And Merlin was kind of talking to Arthur about love, and Arthur says that love business is a powerful thing, and Merlin goes, I'd say it's the greatest force on earth. And we get the little girl squirrel watching them leave, and unfortunately, we really don't get anything else with the girl squirrel. I know that there's a lot of fan art out there with the girl squirrel getting turned into a human and finding her way back to Arthur. And then they kind of grow up together a little bit. And either there's versions of it where either she's called Hazel, or where they kind of like, oh, she's gonna get turned. She later on she gets turned into a human and then she becomes Guinevere. But we don't really learn anything else about her, unfortunately. And Arthur gets in trouble, and he'd been training to be Kay's squire because there was supposed to be this big tournament in London, because they finally decided, oh, we're going to have this giant tournament, and whoever wins is the one that's going to be king. So Hector is like, okay, well, I'll train Kay to be a knight and have him, knighted by Christmas, and then we'll head off to London at New Year's, and he'll be in this giant tournament and become king because he'll win. Kay doesn't have a lot of a chance at winning, but still. It's like, okay, sure, we got a plot device to get Arthur to where the stone is. And because of everything in the kitchen magically cleaning itself, they have this house, or this maid that works in the castle, and she kind of freaks out, and then Arthur ends up getting in trouble, and he's no longer allowed to be Kay's squire, but it gives him more time to study with Merlin. So we get this moment where Archimedes decides that Merlin's kind of going about this the wrong way. He's showing Arthur these huge concepts, but not small, and building on the basics. So Archimedes kind of takes over, and he's like, okay, kid, I'm going to teach you how to read and write. So he starts teaching Arthur alphabet, how to write and how to read, which is, a good thing for the kid to learn how to do. And Archimedes seems to be a bit better of, teaching the basics. And at one point during the lesson, Merlin pulls out this model airplane, because he has all this stuff, because he sees into the future and everything, and he's like, I'm a prophet, I'm a prognosticator, I'm a wise old man that can see into the future. No. And we end up getting, Arthur ends up having to, Merlin has this very long beard, as you can see in the pictures, and that gets used a lot for gags. He keeps wrapping around his head, or it keeps getting him trapped in things, he gets caught in doors, which is just funny to watch. And he ends up, he's like winding up the airplane because he's going to show Arthur how it works, and like he whacks, his beard gets wound up in it, and then he tries throwing it, and then we get this airplane all the way up, beard hanging down, Merlin falling out the window, almost falling out the window. And then we get, Arthur pointing out the fact, he always kind of wanted to learn how to, or always was very interested in like being able to fly. So Arthur, or Merlin, turns him into a bird. And that results in Archimedes teaching Arthur how to fly. More just because Archimedes, like, it's like, no, you're not teaching the kid how to fly, Merlin. That's my territory, mine. So Archimedes starts teaching him how to fly, and then they get attacked by a hawk. And I'm going to put the sword down. There we go. For now, Archimedes, they get attacked by a hawk, and Arthur goes into the woods, and that's where we end up meeting the Mad Madam Mim, who is a wizard or she's a witch that lives in the forest, and she's, doesn't really like nice and sweet and cute things. And she ends up, Arthur unfortunately ends up landing in her house, and then she ends up finding out who he is, and she ends up, explaining her power, and she goes from, makes herself, this is what she normally looks like. She makes herself uglier. Very ugly. And then she changes herself into something very pretty. And, it's magic, so she can make herself look however she wants. And then she ends up turning herself into a cat, and she starts chasing Arthur all the way around, all around her house, because she wants to destroy Arthur, because he's something that Merlin cares about, and she doesn't like Merlin. And they end up getting, then Merlin shows up right before she's going to destroy Arthur. And her and Merlin end up having a wizard's duel. And, it's, Mim sets several ground rules, including the rule, only real animals, you can't turn invisible, and you can't turn into anything imaginary. So, like, pink dragons or whatever. She's going to cheat, of course. And, Merlin and her go back and forth, changing into different animals to try to, outwit each other. Merlin turns into a turtle, a rabbit, a caterpillar, a walrus, a mouse, a crab, and a goat. And then Mim turns into a crocodile, a fox, a hen, an elephant, a tiger, a snake, and a rhino. Different matchups happen kind of in that order of, rabbit versus, fox, crocodile, and turtle versus crocodile, hen versus caterpillar, blah, blah, blah. And then, Merlin's about to win, and then Mim turns herself into a giant purple dragon, because, it's not a pink dragon, but she's purple. And, all of Merlin's animals are blue, all of, Mim's animals are pink, except the dragon. And then she decides, she, tries to catch Merlin, and he ends up turning in, he doesn't turn invisible, but he turns into a germ that makes her very, very sick. And she gets, all green and pasty and everything, and gets spots, and she has like hot and cold flashes, and she's going to be very, very sick for a while. So Merlin won the wizard's duel because he outsmarted her. And she's, then she's sick for a few weeks. And then we cut ahead to Christmas Day. Kay is knighted, and Hobbs, who is supposed to, we never see Hobbs. Hobbs, who is supposed to be the squire, or I don't think we ever see Hobbs. I don't remember. Is supposed to be the squire, ends up getting sick, so then Arthur ends up becoming the squire. Merlin gets very, very disappointed in Arthur because he prefers the games, games and war games and being a squire and understanding knights as opposed to academics. Which, I get where Merlin's coming from. It's kind of the whole jock versus, academia versus, jocks. But it's like, okay, you're in the Dark Ages. Being smart is very important, yes. But so is being able to defend yourself. And sometimes being able to use a sword and a shield and how to ride a horse and how to use a battle axe or whatever and how to hunt and, bows and arrows and everything are a bit more important at certain points in time than being able to read or being able to write or being able to, do amazing speeches or whatever. that's, that's the world where Arthur is in, and Merlin keeps, he's like, well, the future is going to have all of this, and it's like, yeah, but Arthur lives in the now, and so Merlin's very upset about this. So he's like, blast me to Bermuda. So he turns into kind of a rocket and blasts himself off. And Archimedes explains, like, well, he blasted himself to Bermuda. It's an island that hasn't been discovered yet, because Merlin can apparently travel through time because he's seen a lot of different things. And then we cut to Arthur and Hector and Kay are in London at the tournament. And Arthur, it's down to, they're going to do sword duels next. And Arthur realizes, oh, I forgot Kay's sword at the hotel. So he has to run back to the hotel, and he has Archimedes with him. And, he's like, oh, I have to go back to the inn or the hotel or whatever and get Kay's sword. But, the inn's closed because everybody's at the tournament. And Archimedes points out this sword sitting in this stone in a churchyard. So Arthur goes over and he's like, well, Kay needs a sword. So, he, touches the sword and it lights up. There's like light starts coming down, and he's like, so he's like, Kay needs a sword. So he like takes out the sword and he runs back to the tournament and he gives it to Kay, and Kay's like, this isn't my sword. And he like shows it to his dad, and his father notices the inscription on the sword that says, he whosoever pulleth out this sword from this stone and anvil will be the next, is, the true king of England, or whatever the full quote was. And Arthur and they're just like, oh, that's the sword in the stone, and they all realize that, and like all these knights and everything are like, that's the sword from the sword in the stone. It's like, who pulled it from it? And they're like, this kid did. And they're like, well, that can't be right. So they go back and it's just like, they put the sword back in the stone, and they're like, okay, well, take it out of the stone again. And Kay's like, well, if he's already pulled it from the stone, then anyone should be able to do it. So he goes over, and Kay starts trying to pull the sword out, and his father comes over and helps because it's not working. A bunch of others start trying to pull the sword from the stone. And then it's like, well, let Arthur try. None of us can do it again, so let Arthur try. So he goes, and Arthur, pulls the sword from the stone again, and he's proclaimed king. Because, of course, by the way, kids, if you have a real sword, do not hold it by the end. Hold it by this part. And don't put it by your neck, but, it's this is plastic, so it's okay. I do weird PSAs, apparently. So, Arthur is proclaimed king. Simply because of the fact of he pulled this sword from the stone. And they're like, well, what's the boy's name? And Hector's like, Arthur. And him and Kay both kneel to Arthur, and, he's proclaimed king and everything. And then we cut to, Arthur's king sitting on this, has this big sword and this big crown that keeps falling down on his head, and sitting on the throne waiting, with Archimedes. And Arthur is like, but I don't know how to be a king. I don't want to be a king. And he's like, okay, well, or Archimedes says, well, we'll sneak out the back. And like every time they open the door, it's like, oh, hail the king. It's like wailing in. So they're just like, ah, frick. So he can't get out. And then Arthur's like, I wish Merlin were here. And then Merlin shows up, and he's dressed like he just got off of vacation, because he kind of did. And he's like, oh, well, yeah, where are we? Oh, castle. What happened to you? He's like, I'm king. Arthur's like, I pulled this weird sword from a stone, and now I'm king, and I don't know what to do. I'm like, I wouldn't know what to do either, in all honesty. And Arthur, Merlin's like, oh yeah, King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. That's what this is. And Arthur's like, round table, and he's like, well, would you prefer a square one? No, round is fine. So it's like, and Merlin's like comforting him. It's like, tries to explain, you're going to be such an amazing figure, historical figure. You're going to have so many, books and plays and movies and motion pictures named after you. And he's like, what's a motion? And Arthur's like, what's a motion picture? And Merlin's like, well, it's like television without the commercials. And I'm sitting, and like last night we watched this, and I'm like, He doesn't know what a movie is. How he doesn't know what television is either, dude. You're way ahead of him. Way ahead of him. You're like, I don't remember what time frame the Arthurian myth is supposed to take place in, but you're like at least 800 to 1,000 years too early. And it's just like, no. That's kind of where the end of that is. There's not, I mean, there's no sequels to it. In in regards to the making of it, there's a few bits in it where it's just like they reuse certain animation, just flipped from a different angle or whatever. That they just reuse certain bits, so that way they don't have to redraw everything. Arthur is actually voiced by 3 different people, 3 different boys, because the original actor that they had play him entered puberty while they were still recording all of the lines, because of course you do multiple recordings of the movie and different scenes and everything as you go along and make the movie and make new scenes, and you want to see how they how the voices sound paired up with the animation. And the boy started through puberty, so then they had to cast, actually I think he was the 2 sons of one of the Wolfgang Reitherman. He had 2 sons. I don't remember what their exact names are, but he had 2 sons, and they ended up doing the voices for Arthur. So he was voiced by 3 different people. So if you watch the movie, sometimes it's different voices from scene to scene, or even mid-scene it will change depending on what lines they had to change, or had to still record for the character. Not too much with that. Merlin is kind of an eccentric professor type character. It's still, I mean, there. In all honesty, there wasn't any bonus features on the set that I have, so I don't have a whole lot of bonus feature material for you for that. For how they made the movie is probably pretty similar to 101 Dalmatians, where I think they still use like the Xerox machine to print everything. In regards to Merlin and Arthur popping up in other media, Merlin and Arthur have both popped up in House of Mouse. At some point, Mickey is trying to do like this bartering system, and he needs certain things, so he goes to Merlin and he's like, "Well, I need $50." So Merlin's like, "Well, if you find me a sword, for Arthur, I'll give you $50." And then another bit where it's like, Jiminy Cricket is doing something, and he's like seated with Rafiki and King Triton and Grandmother Willow as part of the elders that Jiminy Cricket refers to. So Merlin's sitting with them, because they're kind of the older, the wiser characters in Disney. Merlin is, I think, one of the few non-princess characters that has popped up in Sophia the First. He's just pops up, and he's I guess he's there to train her and how to do magic. I don't really exactly know, but he's there for a little while, and I think he interacts with, I think, one or both of her step siblings. I don't know. And then we get into Kingdom Hearts. Merlin isn't a huge figure in Kingdom Hearts, not as important as like the not as important as the as Yen Sid from. We'll get to Once Upon a Time in a second. First, Kingdom Hearts. We're first introduced to Merlin in Traverse Town. There's like some underground stuff in Traverse Town, and he ends up there, and he sets up like a little, not a shop, but like his little home there, and that's where like Fairy Godmother is. And you go there every now and then to like do different missions for him, and like there's that's where the Winnie the Pooh book is that you end up going inside at various points in time. But Merlin has kind of helped to train you a little bit in how to use your magic. I mean, it's not too much. He's there to do kind of advice, and then he pops up again, and a few other ones, because he pops up later on, and you have to fix the 100 Acre Woods again, and he's kind of guarding that book, and we get a lot of different things. I mean, like, Merlin's just kind of there. He's not major character too much. At one point near the end of, I think it's near the end of Kingdom Hearts 2, he ends up taking Leah and Kairi, or partway through Kingdom Hearts. Or no, it's not in Kingdom Hearts 2, because at the end of Kingdom Hearts 2, that's when Leah is no longer Axel. I will probably do a video about like the Organization 13 later on, but not right now. but Merlin trains Leah and then Kyrie later on in being Keyblade masters and how to use Keyblades. And so they're there for a while, and then later on in like Kingdom Hearts 3, you interact with him outside of a restaurant in it's not Traverse Town, where this time it's Twilight Town, I think is what it is. It's kind of a little, just another town that's in the area that, or another world that's in the area where you make friends. Um, so you end up there a lot, and he ends up outside of this restaurant that's owned by Scrooge McDuck and ran by Remy the Rat from Ratatouille, because reasons. Hey, it makes sense in it makes sense in Kingdom Hearts, okay, but not too much besides that. Um, as I said before, I've not really watched too much of the animated stuff when it comes to Descendants, and I haven't read any of the books that go along with Descendants. But apparently, Arthur and his son, I think it was Artie, are part of the Descendants world. But Arthur and Artie, neither of them really like technology that much, so they kind of keep their kingdom, Camelot Heights, or their area, Camelot Heights or whatever it's called, kind of in the Dark Ages. And so they don't really have like modern cleaning and bathing and everything. And they don't, the other kingdoms don't really like that too much. Arthur's not really part of Kingdom Hearts. I don't know if I don't remember Excalibur popping up in Kingdom Hearts at any point in time. And then we get into Once Upon a Time. And Once Upon a Time is where things get a bit more complicated when it comes to the Arthurian legend, because in the Arthurian legend, in Once Upon a Time, they do stay a bit closer to the Arthurian legend than they do in Sword in the Stone. In the Arthurian legend, we do have Merlin. He is a very wise magician, sorcerer, and he ended up falling in love with this woman, and I cannot remember what her name is, and even if I did, I can't pronounce it. It's like Nimue, not Nimu, whatever. And via things that happen, she ends up becoming the first Dark One. And he had forged Excalibur out of the Holy Grail. And he was going to use it. I don't remember if he was going to use that to kill the woman that he loved or seal her away or whatever, to try to find a way of curing her from being the Dark One. I don't remember. A lot of this is just me double checking the wiki and remembering, oh yeah, I remember that now. But again, gonna start rewatching Once Upon a Time soon, and I'll get myself caught up on it then, and I might do a little revisit on some stuff later on, for specifically more for Once Upon a Time stuff. But he makes Excalibur, and then like the tip of Excalibur gets broken off, and that's turned into the Dark One's blade. So here we have the Dark One's blade and Excalibur next to each other, and at one point it's Emma's goal, when she's the Dark One, to forge the two of them together so that way she can get rid of the Dark One's power, finally destroy it. And that doesn't end up working. I don't remember exactly what happens with that, but we are introduced to Arthur. Well, first off, this is Merlin in Once Upon a Time. We actually find out, and I had forgotten about this when I did the Fantasia video, Merlin is actually the sorcerer, as in like the sorcerer's apprentice. I think it's supposed to be him. I think that's what I remember correctly from what I remember seeing on Wikipedia for the wiki for Once Upon a Time, is that Merlin is the sorcerer, because he's kind of this very powerful, all-knowing sorcerer, and him and the apprentice are in charge of trying to find the author, which leads to its own barrel of monkeys. And so fun with that. But Arthur is a bit more Arthur, along with the roles of like Rumpel as Beast and Peter Pan, gets kind of turned a bit more villainous in this than he is in the usual story of King Arthur and Knights of the Round Table and such. Because King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, King Arthur is very much a good person. Him and his knights are very good. They go and save people from horrible monsters that are harming their city, or they help them with food, or they help with building things. And there's lots of different things that have done various things with King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Of course, there's the king, and the Mark Twain's a kid in King Arthur's court, and movies, books, plays, whatever, all about King Arthur, that were all based on different facets. Like I like this one here. This book here is like young King Arthur, so it's him becoming king, and then this graphic novel one goes very much into. Starts out with him as a boy, and it goes through into when he dies, and when they take the sword, when the sword of Excalibur is broken, and it's thrown into the lake, so the Lady of the Lake can fix it, and then it's fixed and returned to Arthur, and then when Arthur dies, the sword is returned to the lake, to the Lady of the Lake, to wait for when Arthur awakens again, and then only the true King of England will be able to have Arthur again, be able to have this again. And I just remembered something else that I forgot in regards to Arthur and Disney. I will add that in when I get finished with the Once Upon a Time stuff. So I remember. And I will add that in. But what happens is, in the story, it's, Arthur met Guinevere and fell in love, and she was his queen. And, eventually he's, Guinevere also falls in love with Lancelot, and then, she's forced to pick. And if you've seen, the BBC series, Merlin, a lot about that, because that's very much about young Arthur and Guinevere, and Merlin's actually the same age as Arthur. So it's a lot of that. And so it's, King Arthur in Once Upon a Time ends up being a bit more villainous. Not like, like mustache twirling, horrible cackling type villainous type stuff, but he ends up getting very obsessive because they find Excalibur, but it has the tip broken off. So he tries and tries and tries to find the tip, and he ends up, I don't remember if it was Rumpelstiltskin that gave him this power, or if it was something from Merlin or from someone else that gave him a power, give him this like powder that he can put it on the sword and make something that's broken appear to be whole. So he was gonna put it over the sword to make the sword look whole, but Arthur then took it, and because him and Guinevere ended up having an argument. He knew that she was, I guess, I don't remember if she was in love with Lancelot. This is Guinevere. Guinevere, very pretty, but she, I don't remember exactly what happened, something else. So he ends up using the powder to, on her to keep her happy with him, and then he uses it over their kingdom of Camelot to protect, to make the kingdom look better, and seem to be whole, as opposed to, this fledgling kingdom that was having a lot of problems. But what ends up happening is, Emma and the others end up there when she first becomes the Dark One. So she's slowly becoming the Dark One. And he finds out that, oh, they're this, and he wants to kill Emma and take her dagger so he can, forge Excalibur whole. Because that was, that's what he's been told his whole life is his destiny is to, take Excalibur, fix it, and then use it to slay whatever evil there is. And we get a lot of stuff that happens with first curse, second curse, third curse, fourth curse, whatever. At some point, Arthur has to end up fighting Merida. Because Merida. Because there's this helmet that her father had, and he wants the helmet, and oh god, so many things that happen with that. And we get, eventually, what is it? It's eventually... One second, I have to plug my computer in because it's getting very low on power. Okay, the computer's fine now. So we get the bit where, and I know I'm glossing over things with Once Upon a Time, but, Arthur had dreams for so long that were sent to him by Merlin, who was trapped, that, he's going to be this great king one day, and he gets very obsessed with that. And that leads to him making some not good choices, which result in, at some point, him, Arthur dying and going to hell, and he ends up having to work with Hook to fix something. Kind of Hook forces him to work with him, and Hook ends up becoming, Hook gets his life back, but Arthur ends up staying in the Underbrook is what it's called. Instead of Storybrooke, there's Underbrook, which is the it's a like replica of Storybrooke, but it's only filled with the souls of the dead. And Emma and the others end up down there at one point, and Excalibur and Arthur, and everything ends up happening at some point, and then Arthur ends up down there because he gets killed by whatever reason. I don't remember who kills him, but he ends up down there, and they end up defeating Cruella, who, as you remember from the 101 Dalmatians live action one where I talked about Cruella, she ended up becoming kind of like the ruler of Underbrook, and then I think they deposed her, and then Arthur decides to stay in the Underbrook and try to help a bunch of the souls be able to move on instead of being trapped in Underbrook. So they can have a chance at, either being in a better place, or I guess Underbrook would be better than like the going to the torture place, I guess. They don't exactly state what allows you to go to heaven, because both of Regina's parents, I think, ended up going there, and there were a few others, like Rumple and Belle ended up there. We'll get to them when we get to Beauty and the Beast, but not yet. But we get through a whole bunch of that with Once Upon a Time, and I know I'm glossing over stuff because it's just been so long since I've watched Once Upon a Time. So, the thing that I said when I was working through the Once Upon a Time stuff and what I said about remembering, I remember, okay, so there was the Disney animated series that was called Gargoyles. It's, Goliath, Brooklyn, Broadway, Hudson, Bronx, Angela, Elisa, Demona, Macbeth, everything. And at one point, Goliath, Bronx, and Elisa end up on a boat end up going to Isle of Avalon, which, if you know your Arthurian mythology, is supposedly where Arthur is buried. Arthur is buried on an island called Avalon that you can only get to via certain magic. And they end up going there because they have to fight this very powerful sorcerer and Demona and Macbeth. And just go watch Gargoyles in and of itself. I need to look and see if that's on Disney Plus. I hope it is, because I really want to watch it again. Moving on, but they end up having to awaken King Arthur so that way he can help them fight this very powerful sorcerer. And they end up, they wake him up, and after they defeat this sorcerer, the Arthur is like, okay, well, I'm going to go off on my own adventure. And he ends up finding his way to London. And he finds his way to, I think it's some cathedral or whatever, and he finds the stone in the bottom of this throne where the stone is where the sword had once been. And the stone is, of course, or the sword is not there because it was, tossed into the river at one point, or tossed into the lake with the Lady of the Lake for her to guard it at one point. And what ends up happening is he ends up running into this other gargoyle named Griff. And Griff helps him, and he's like, because Griff had interacted with Lisa and Goliath a bit earlier on via time travel and World War II, and again, certain sentences that I can say with gargoyles that are be like, well, they had to do this, and it's just like, okay. Sentences for Once Upon a Time in Gargoyles can kind of be like, okay, well, this happened and this happened, but if you don't understand the concept, then it's just a little bit off. But yeah, just Gargoyles was a good series. Go watch Gargoyles too. As I say with the 101 Dalmatians video, it's like, if none of these videos ever have a Disney Plus commercial on them, that's a very bad lack of advertising on their part. Very bad product placement, because it's like, all she does is talk about Disney movies for her first several videos. So just, put a bunch of Disney Plus videos. Put Disney Plus ads in those. Okay. Yeah. But what ends up happening is Griff and Arthur end up going to this lake, and this body of water is supposed to be the Lady of the Lake, can be summoned in any body of water, and they're like, okay, well, Arthur's like, well, I need to get my sword back. So the Lady of the Lake, uses her power to send them to New York, and says, oh, gives them this riddle or whatever, it's in the Isle of Green within the Emerald, or within the Glass City, or something like that. And they end up where Goliath's clan is, Brooks is One Piece. This is not One Piece. Where Hudson and Broadway and Brooklyn and Lexington are. And they end up helping them get to Central Park because they figure, oh, well, from the description, it's in Central Park. And they find this giant stone dragon. and they have to fight Macbeth and his cronies, and then Macbeth and Arthur end up kind of dueling over who's going to be king. Who's going to be the one that gets Excalibur. And via, Arthur proving himself, he's the one that does succeed in claiming Excalibur. So he has his sword returned to him. And Macbeth, he declares Macbeth an ally. And Macbeth, I think from that point forward, is kind of an ally to the gargoyles to a degree. I mean, I don't remember if he pops up again too much later on, but he does, I believe, become a bit of an ally to them. And I may end up talking about gargoyles at some point, but not yet. But Arthur ends up then making a Griff into one of his knights. So I had forgotten about that until I was talking about it. I was like, oh yeah, they have to go after the sword because it got thrown into the lake and everything. When it comes to Arthur, you have all of the different, you have all the different knights of the Round Table, and Merlin and Guinevere, and Camelot, and all these. There's good knights and there's bad knights, and then there's Monty Python and the Quest for the Holy Grail. I've seen it. I'm aware that someone's mother is a hamster and his father smelt of elderberries, but that's a different thing. But, so with Sword in the Stone, and then later on referencing and other things, Arthur, Merlin, I mean, it's not my favorite Disney movie. I like it better than, I guess for all intents and purposes, I would guess to have to say like my least favorite Disney movie would be, the Ichabod Crane and Mr. Toad. But those, I still like Sword in the Stone a bit. As I said, there's not really much music that happens in it, like background music, and a lot of that's like trumpets for various things and the sound effects. But, Merlin sings a few songs here and there. And since he's more the one where that tends to come from, and I just, there's not too much else that happens with that. They pop up in House of Mouse. Merlin's part of Kingdom Hearts. For like 2 or 3 seasons, Arthur and Merlin and Camelot are very crucial in Once Upon a Time. And so that leads to some different things that way. But we also get a lot of, Merlin teaches Arthur some hard lessons. In, sometimes brain is stronger than brawn, but Merlin, I think also, and that was one of the things that I just like I wished was kind of pointed out a little bit more of like, Merlin doesn't really end up learning the lesson of you can't always focus everything on the brain. That you need to have, if you're going to have someone be a king, you need to be able to defend yourself as well. Brain isn't brawn, brain is important. Being able to outsmart your opponent can be a very important thing. But, and that's been proven time and time again in lots of different media and books and movies and lots of different stories that, brawn, David and Goliath, brawn isn't always going to outweigh brain. But when it comes to Merlin, I think they could have done a little bit better with that Merlin. And he doesn't really have that same idea later on in Kingdom Hearts. He seems to have gotten a bit better at that because he's more willing to do the concept of, okay, physical training is also very important too. And they do a little bit better with that. But there's not a whole lot besides that happens with Merlin. As I said, there wasn't really any bonus features on the movie, so there wasn't really too much that I can tell you about the bonus features beyond the fact that they recycled a few scenes where they just, played the scene like flip it and play it that way, or, whatever. I don't remember if they just did anything where they just played the scene in reverse, but there's a scene where like Arthur falls down a bunch of stairs, so they just use that scene twice, and a couple of other bits where they just like, animation of Kay eating is used twice or something like that, which I don't see a problem with. I mean, animation is a very hard medium to do between drawing everything and then having it, inked and then colored and everything. I perfectly understand why it takes so long, but why it's also like, okay, well, we can, this is going to happen twice and it was funny the first time, so we'll just use it again and do it that way. Or, whatever the case is. Save some sketch sheets. It saves some people some having to reuse paint and all that stuff. So that's fine by me. Not too much. I mean, there's not really too much with like the voice actors in, Sword in the Stone. I've seen various versions of different things that have to deal with King Arthur. I will say that my favorite story involving King Arthur I've seen a fair amount of Merlin, but I would have to say that my favorite story involving King Arthur doesn't actually center around King Arthur. It actually centers around kind of like the next generation, this generation that kind of grew up under King Arthur and under his rule. And that movie is called Quest for Camelot. It's not a Disney movie. This is a picture. You may have seen you may have seen DVDs or Blu-rays of it around. I very much like it. You get a lot of good voice actors are in it. Considering I think Peter Brosnan plays Arthur, and Cary Elwes plays Garrett, and there's a few other ones, and Gary Oldman plays the main villain, who ends up having a very great Broadway style musical number at some point in the movie, and it's just fun to watch. I may end up doing a discussion on just some of my favorite non-Disney animated movies, and Quest for Camelot will definitely be in that because it has some very good music. Plus, you get it was Eric Idle as one of the dragons, because there's a two-headed dragon in the movie. There's Eric Idle and what was the other guy's name? I know that name is Eric Idle and insult comedian. What is his name? Passed by now, I think. Don Rickles. Don Rickles. I was like, I know this name. Yeah, Eric Idle and I think Don Rickles are the two that play the dragon. Two-headed dragon that have like a very good Broadway musical number because it's just fun. But Quest for Camelot is kind of like the kids that grew up under Arthur, and they kind of do that. It's not Disney related, but it's still, I figured I'd at least pop it on at the end here to talk about a little bit. It's something I'll definitely do more of a video about at some point, but not yet. So the next video will be Jungle Book, because that is the next one in the lineup. And then it will be Aristocats, and then I believe after that it is Robin Hood. So yeah, it'll be Jungle Book, and that'll be the original Disney animated Jungle Book. The sequel that they did, don't remember what the exact name of the sequel is, but there was a sequel that they did in the 2000s, and then there will be the live action one that they did in like 2017 or whatever. So I'll talk about those. I don't know if that'll be a one part video, or if that'll be a single video or a 2-part video. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember off the top of my head. Again, that sequel is not one of my favorites, but we'll get to that when we get to that. I may watch it, may rewatch it, I may not. Some of the sequels, as I've said, I loved. That's not necessarily one of them. I guess they could have tried to do something with like a sequel to Sword in the Stone that I guess could have been more of a grown-up King Arthur, and having Merlin have to admit that, okay, fine, yes, sometimes brawn can be a very important thing. But yeah, as I mentioned when I mentioned the female squirrel, there's the bit where people think that like maybe a little bit later she went to Madame Mim and said, hey, turn me into a human girl, and turns her into this like adorable little redheaded human girl that then finds Arthur, and he has to teach her about how to be human. Teach her how to eat, how to read, how to write, all this fun stuff. And she just keeps attacking him with like hugs and kisses, and like it's the concept of like, oh, she ends up becoming like Guinevere or whatever. It's cute. It's a cute theory, and I've seen fan art, and they're adorable, and they do a great job with it. There's also funny fan art that I found at one point of like, because there's I haven't played Zelda or any of the Legend of Zelda games, but I'm aware enough of Zelda to know what it is. That there's like the Master Sword in Zelda, and there's like an image of like Link and Arthur like fighting over a sword, and Link's like, "Give me the Master Sword," and Arthur's like, "No, this is Excalibur." So it's just a funny image that comes up with that. Just Google that one; it's funny. I don't remember where it was, but whatever. Yeah, I like the Arthurian legends. I think they're very good. There's another book that I want to get that kind of goes along with this young Arthur book. It's called Young Guinevere, and I've seen it. I don't know exactly where it is, but I've seen it. And actually, this one, the graphic novel one that I have, I'm going to show you a better picture of what that looks like up close. Very cool looking cover there with King Arthur and his Excalibur there. And he has a giant like axe on his back for whatever reason. But this was given to me by my mom works at the State Library Commission, and she's friends with like the children's librarian for the state of Nebraska. And so there were times when I would go and visit my mom at the Library Commission, and I would look through books, and like sometimes like when it got to the point where they were done looking through the books and such, I would get to pick out a couple of them. Apparently Rowlett disagrees, but the video is almost finished, so. Rowlett. It's the only stuffed owl I have. Rowlett. And I would get books every now and then, and that's kind of how I built up some of my book collections, and got me into certain other book series. So I thank you very much. I hope you liked the video. I hope that you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. And below the hilt in letters of gold were written these words: Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightful king of England. Though many tried for the sword with all their might, none could move the sword nor stir it. So the miracle had not worked, and England was still without a king, and in time the miraculous sword was forgotten.